Hello and welcome back to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs Podcast. My name is Amalia Dempsey, and in today's episode, I interview Elsa Sinclair. Now, if you haven't heard of Elsa before, Elsa Sinclair is a horse trainer from the Pacific Northwest of the United States. From a family of horse trainers, she has had a meandering journey through many different styles of horsemanship until she stumbled on a question that needed exploration. What if horses were given a choice? Would they let us ride them? Without force or tools to control and without bribes to lure them? The question led to a project that became a documentary, a journey of one wild Mustang off of the range called Myrna, a horse with her own mind, strength, and sense of independence. One trainer, no tools, just body language. The ups and downs, the trials and frustrations, and the beauty and persevering truth connection brings in its wake. This is the adventure that shaped the horse trainer that Elsa Sinclair is today and the theories behind freedom-based training. So I first discovered Elsa when I watched the documentary Taming Wild. And it was really, my first introduction to her. And then since then, she has done another documentary that had Andrea Wadey in it. And I've already interviewed Andrea on the podcast before as well. So they were both in that documentary, Taming Wild, Pura Vida. And I've been listening to Elsa's Tea Time podcast on and off over the years. And I just really like her energy. She's just a really calm, authentic, genuine, peaceful person that's just really nice to listen to. And I did hear that she was bringing out a book soon, which I'm excited to read. So I thought I could get her onto the podcast and we can chat about freedom-based training and her upcoming book. So in this episode, we discuss the pivotal moment that sparked Elsa's quest to answer the question, what if horses were given a choice? Would they let us ride them? Is a domestic life for horses better than the wild? Differences that Elsa has noticed between horses raised in domestic environments versus feral/wild horses. The differences between the Taming Wild documentary and the upcoming book Taming Wild, the compelling origins of freedom-based training, and the promise it holds for horses and humans. Whether it's truly possible to develop a riding partnership without tools or bribes, how freedom-based training compares to pressure and release and positive reinforcement methods, the biggest challenge and breakthrough moments in the early stages of training Myrna, Elsa's broad framework for working with horses in freedom-based training, whether you can blend freedom-based training with more traditional approaches, how to read the health of your horse's nervous system, the concepts of tolerance, acceptance, and enjoyment in freedom-based training and leaving horses wanting more, why Elsa believes her method is not woo-woo or spiritual and why it's actually very logical, the surprising difference Elsa has noticed in horses in different climates, Elsa's new app and book that are being released soon, plus so much more. What really stood out to me is Elsa, like I said, has this really warm, grounded, calm, and authentic energy that is just really peaceful to be around. And she's a really positive person. You'll hear in the interview how even when I touch on more controversial conversations, she has a very open-minded and positive outlook on these things. And I just found that quite refreshing. As always, I hope you enjoy the show. And please, if you love this episode or any of the episodes, screenshot and share it on social media or simply just send it to a friend who you think might be interested. Every time I see a share or get feedback, it really motivates me to keep giving you episodes. So if you'd like to hear more episodes, please share the podcast with more people. You can also leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's very much appreciated. And let me know if there is anyone you would like me to have on the show that I haven't yet interviewed. Just send me a message on Instagram at Amalia_horses. Alrighty, let's hear from Elsa Sinclair. Welcome to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs Podcast. I'm your host, Amalia Dempsey. If you believe in kind horsemanship, a holistic approach to horse care and training, and a world where both horse and rider thrive and enjoy the journey, you're in the right place. Here I share insights from my own horsemanship journey and the wisdom of horse people from around the world to improve horse and human relationships, promote ethical training practices, and build deeper connections with our horses. Together, we explore training methods with an open mind, always striving to do what's best for the horse. This podcast is about lifelong learning, questioning the norm, and embracing the journey of growing alongside our horses. Be sure to follow the show so you never miss an episode, and visit amaliadempsey.com for more resources to elevate your riding and horsemanship. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Welcome, Elsa Sinclair, to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to get to sit down and have this conversation with you.
So you grew up in a family of horse trainers and you've experimented with many different styles of horsemanship over the years. What was the pivotal moment that led you to ask, what if horses were given a choice? Would they let us ride them?
You know, actually, it was a student of mine who asked that question of me, and I had never asked the question. In hindsight, I do think that I've been searching for the answer to that question my entire life, but I'd never framed it so well. And so when the student asked me, she said, "Do you think horses like being ridden?" And I was a professional trainer at the time, and I said, "Yeah, I think they love it." And she said, "No, but I mean, if they were wild and they had their own life and they had all of their own desires and things that they did, would they want to carry a human around?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we bring in wild Mustangs and Brumbies all the time, and they seem to adapt to the job really, really well." And she said, "But do you think anybody ever gave them a choice?" And at that point, I was stumped. I don't think any trainer has actually ever given them a choice. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I started thinking, how would you shape a project like that? How would you shape an experiment to take an older adult wild horse that lived their own life and had their own likes and dislikes and family and history, and spent time with them in a way where they got to make a choice to see if maybe riding was something they could like to do if they got to choose it. And so I was obsessed with the project. And then I ended up telling every horse trainer friend I knew that somebody should do this project, and everybody laughed at me. So eventually, I guess I had to do it myself.
And so that led you onto the project that you developed into the documentary with Mirna. That would have been such a confronting question to face from a student, in a sense that it would kind of question everything that you'd been previously working on up until that point. Did it feel confronting at the time?
It felt exciting.
Well, that's good.
I guess it felt like I couldn't imagine why I hadn't thought of the question before. I didn't know it was a question we were allowed to ask. And I was really excited that somebody was asking it. But then once it was asked, somebody had to figure out how to set up an experiment to find out the answer.
Yes. And in the documentary, you said something along the lines of, life in the domestic world is better than you know.
Yes.
And yeah, I was pondering on this one because sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe horses would like it better in the wild, where they don't have any obligations to be with humans. So can you tell us some of your reasoning behind that quote? And why do you think it's genuinely better in the domestic world for horses?
Oh, well, I think it very much depends on where they've come from and their quality of life out in the wild. The horses that I got were specifically rounded up because of a lack of food and water on the range. So they had known true hardship before they came to me. I'm not sure all wild horses would feel like a domestic life is better, but I do know that wild horses can go days without water sometimes, and can go, months without having enough food. And that's something that nobody would choose. But it's part and parcel with being wild, is the unpredictability of it. When Mirna came to live with me, she actually adapted to domestic life so quickly. And she's one of those horses that when she discovered that roofs existed, she'd see 2 raindrops and she'd get under the roof. And then every once in a while, she'd start to go out, she'd feel a raindrop, and she'd back right back in under that shelter. She thought a roofed building was the most amazing invention under the sun.
That's kind of cute. Have you noticed a difference between horses that are raised in domestic environments versus feral or wild horses?
Yeah, hugely different. The biggest difference I've noticed is that feral or wild horses have a lot of practice being herd members. And so they've had uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers. And I mean, most of our domestic horses don't never meet their father. So they have no sense of family in that way. And what I find is the feral or wild horses, they just have better social skills. And that doesn't mean that they won't be aggressive. Some of them are quite aggressive, but they are really clearly understanding the point of interactions. And they're better at being co-regulated than domestic horses. So when I say co-regulated, what I mean is that somebody can help them feel better. And what I find is when you get to know them a little bit, a horse that's been raised in a family like that, when you reach out and you say, look, I can help you, they believe you because they've had a lot of experience where somebody did help them. Our domestic horses are very often left alone in situations where nobody helps them. And they lose this sense that somebody can help them. And so I find the domestic horses are often that's the first project we have to do with the domestic horse is just prove to them that, look, somebody is on your side. You have a team.
It sounds like you've found that the improved social interaction and that co-regulation is transferable from the herd to humans in a horse that has had that kind of wild slash feral upbringing. Is that right?
Absolutely. I actually think that they are as fascinated by it as we are. So, as humans, we co regulate each other all the time and we have social interactions and structures, but there's a reason that there's a lot of us that get quite enamored with horses and dogs and other. There's a cross species thing that happens when you realize that you can build a bond with somebody outside of your species that is fascinating.
Hmm. You've created the documentaries Taming Wild, A Girl and a Mustang, Taming Wild, Pura Vida, and soon you'll be releasing a book, Taming Wild, The Compelling Origins of Freedom-Based Training and the Promise It Holds for Horses with Humans. How do these creations differ and what can people expect to be different about the book?
So the book is really, it's a story. It's a story with some theory and understanding thread through it. And it gives you a lot more than the movies can. The movies are really more inspirational than educational. And I did them that way because mostly I was beginning and I was still learning what it was to be educational with all of this stuff. I had found out it was possible, but I hadn't done it with very many horses at that point. So that's what makes the movies more inspirational than educational. Now I've been working on this since 2011, and I've put a lot of hours into understanding how things work. So what I've done in the book is it starts in my childhood, sort of tapping into the fact that I've always wanted to answer this question, even though I didn't have the question yet. And then it takes you all the way through the year that I filmed that first movie. And really, every time that I hit a problem that I didn't know how to solve, and what it took for me to learn how to solve that problem, which is now in everything I teach. When I teach clinics, when I teach my online course, when I give presentations at expos, all of this stuff came from a stumbling block with Myrna, where there was something that I wanted to be able to do, but I didn't know how. And how that led me to the learning of all the stuff I teach today.
I guess this next question is related to that because when you started the project with Myrna, did you have any doubts about whether it would be possible to develop a true riding partnership without tools or bribes?
Absolutely. This was truly an experiment. I had an idea of how I was going to go about it, But a friend of mine said, you should film it. You should film it like it's going to be a documentary. And I said, okay, but what if nothing happens? What if I just sit out in the grass next to this horse for a year and nothing happens? And my friend Margaret was great. She said, I've known you a long time, Elsa, and I'm pretty sure something would happen. So let's just film it and see. And I'm really glad that she had the confidence when I didn't. And it's been this amazing journey where I really didn't know if anything would happen. And I had a full plan that I was going to spend a year with Myrna. And if at the end of the year she was still totally a wild horse, I could revert to all the training methods that I knew. But
Mm.
it turns out it went better than I ever expected. And there was never any desire to go back to any other kind of training for me.
And what were the previous training methods that you knew sort of worked? Like before you started this project, what was your horsemanship base? What had you experimented with already?
So I grew up as a child in pony club doing dressage and jumping and eventing. And from there, I moved on to endurance racing and Western riding and spent a lot of time working as a centered riding instructor through the methods that Sally Swift developed
Mm-hmm.
and got into Feldenkrais and Alexander technique and all sorts of things that I thought could make horses and humans work better together. Linda Tellington Jones, equine awareness method. And then eventually I did end up in the Pirelli sort of stream of thinking, and I developed some horses through that program. And all of that was very useful as a knowledge base when I started on this new project because I had a lot of understanding of how horses worked. I just wasn't sure if you gave them choices, why they would choose to carry a rider because nobody does that. And there must be a good reason why nobody does that.
Mm. And I think one of the things that stands out for you is you're offering the horse this choice, but a lot of people that attempt to do that use like a pure positive reinforcement approach. And many training methods use pressure release or positive reinforcement. How does freedom-based training differ from those approaches?
So it still uses pressure and release. And there's definitely both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement within the practice. The rules of freedom-based training, the way I laid them out, was there would always be multiple sources of comfort within the space. I was only one option. She had other horses to play with. She always had food in many places around the space that she could choose from. I tried to put the food out when she wasn't watching, so it wasn't like I was delivering the food. It was simply there existing in her space. The idea is that if she can choose anything and she's not dependent on me, then it's a real choice. But if she really wants something that I have, like the cookies in my pocket, or she wants me to take the pressure off because I've trapped her between me and a fence, that's not really a choice anymore. Obviously, it's still a choice, but I really wanted a project where she had multiple good choices. It wasn't the choice between the thing I wanted and a lot of bad choices. She really could choose between multiple good things. And I know people do this with food reinforcement where they have plenty of good, snacks for the horse on the side of the paddock, but the horse will still choose to interact with you to get your snacks. That still feels too controlling to me. That felt like I wanted to give her more choice than that. So I didn't use food as a reinforcer because it feels too strong.
Yes. And what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in the early stages of training Myrna?
Honestly, my biggest downfall is the fact that I'm not a very patient person, which people
Really?
laugh at me when I say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I teach it because, and I study it and I work on it all the time because it makes my life better to become a more patient person, but it doesn't come naturally to me. And so every time I felt like I was able to train something and Myrna was really enjoying something, the next day I wanted to come out and do it faster or do it better or do it stronger or do it bigger. And that really was my downfall because so many times I would be having great success And then I would break that success by pushing too hard. And Myrna didn't have to bite. She didn't have to kick. She didn't have to do anything dramatic. All she had to do was walk away. And when she walked away or walked behind the other horse or showed disinterest, I knew that I had gone too far. And you'd think that I would learn pretty quickly to not go too far, but it seems like I had to learn that 100 times over and over again.
And was there a specific breakthrough moment with Myrna where you knew this approach was truly working?
Yeah, I think that I finally understood the timing of how to work with her instead of against her. And I thought it would work, but it was still an experiment. And I think the moment when I got on her and she actually just really felt good while I was sitting on her back, and we were outside the paddock and we just rode down the driveway, away from the house, away from the other horses. And we went out a little ways. And then I asked her to turn around and come home again. And she was perfectly amenable to that idea. And I think in that moment, I thought, wow, this really works. I might break it again tomorrow, but if I can do it once, maybe I can do it again. And, we were able to build on that fairly consistently from that point on. But that was sort of 6 months into the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching that part of the documentary and thinking like, wow, is there any steering? Does she have any brakes? Like, this is my logical mind. Did it feel like you were like, did you have any kind of direction or influence over the movement, or were you sort of going with her? Like, how did it feel?
So absolutely. Before I got on her, I did teach her to turn left and turn right and slow down and back up and go faster. Those are all cues that I had. The interesting part of that is knowing when to ask. So all of us know this, when you're at your best friend's house, you don't ask them if, they'll do your hair right in the middle of when they're baking a cake and their hands are covered with flour. You wait for the right time to ask them to help you with something. And it was like that with Myrna. So I taught the cues and I had all of that there, but then I had to have a little bit of wisdom about when I asked her to do things. So we needed to build habits where she was happy to turn left when I asked her to turn left. And she was happy to do it because so many times before we'd done it and the end result had been good. And that really was my responsibility. I needed to ask when the end result was going to be good at least 80% of the time. I think there's a little bit of leeway there where you can mess up 20% of the time. But if you start messing up 50% of the time, 60% of the time, where you ask them to do something and they feel bad or they don't want to, or they're tired or they're grumpy, you're just building a habit of difficulty between you. So, yes, I had all the cues, but I also had to have some wisdom about how and where and when to ask.
Yeah, it's sort of like in a simplified version of that would be when you're riding, there's that perfect moment to ask for a canter. That's like,
Yes.
yeah, and you can feel it. But if you ask any other time, it's not nice or it doesn't work. It kind of
Yep.
reminds me of that in a riding sense. In one of your tea times, you said, which kind of surprised me as well, that you are quite a logical person, right? You've got your
Mhm.
system that you work through. Um, can you run us through roughly what that system is? I feel like most really good horse trainers, no matter what kind of method they have, they've got a framework that's obviously adaptable to the individual horse. Could you run
Mhm.
us through your rough framework?
Yes, this is gonna be a very broad strokes run through. There's a lot more to it, which is why I wrote a book, but it'll give you sort of the outline. The first step that we go through in my process is we have to link positive feelings in the horse to passivity, which means that when they feel good, we need to not distract them from feeling good. And that sounds really simple. But what I find a lot of people do is as soon as the horse feels good, they want to pet them, kiss them, talk to them, distract them. And what that does is if you're constantly getting in the way of their own sensory system, they don't remember it as well. It's not as good for them. And so that's the very first part of my process is that as I'm working with the horses, I have two states that I'm in. I'm either active, where I'm a little distracting, or I'm passive and I'm the same as they are. And those two states, it's very binary, very black and white. I want to be active when they need distraction because there's inevitably moments where they're a little bit unsure, a little bit concerned, a little bit anxious, a little bit restless. Those are all times when they're asking for distraction. So I've got lots of times I can be active. But when that moment comes where they're using their eyes differently, or their ears, or their nose, they're tickling their five senses with something in the world around them, it's really important that I'm passive. What this does is it builds the horse's desire for passivity. They start really associating when I'm quiet and in harmony and just like them, they feel good. And then they start to link the two states and it starts seeming as if they believe they will feel better if I'm passive. And so they start going out of their way to try and make me passive. And the way they do that is they start using their five senses better. They smell more things, they look at more things, they feel more things. And what I find this does is it trains their nervous system to be more resilient. So every problem you will ever have with a horse starts with a hyperfocus, where they look at something that's problematic for them and they can't look away. And if they look at it long enough, it's going to push their stress up to a point where there's fight or flight. Now, the more practice we do where they use their nervous system, they use their five senses, switching focus from one thing to another thing to another thing, what happens is their system gets more resilient and you just have less and less likelihood of fight or flight. And at this point, I always ask people, if your horse never pushed into you, they never pulled away from you, and they never ignored you, how much training would you have to do? And so my system of training is a very logical step-by-step system of strengthening their nervous system so that they don't want to push or pull or ignore. They want to be interested and curious and alert and involved. And their nervous system gets strong enough that that's not overwhelming for them. From there, we can link all sorts of experiences to the moments they feel good, whether it's a left turn or a backup or trimming their feet. We can link all of those to feel good moments. Now, it sounds like positive reinforcement, but the difference is I'm not in control of it. I'm not handing out a cookie to link it with something I want them to like. They're finding it themselves. And what this does is it gives them a huge amount of self-guidance or self-reliance that when they start to feel bad, they have a whole system of, I could look at something else, see if that makes me feel better. I could smell something else, see if that makes me feel better. And they start developing their own personal motivation to feel good. Now, in the beginning, they're trying to feel good to put the human in passivity because they've learned that the two things go together. Eventually, they start to do it just because feeling good is nice. Then we can link it to anything we want to teach them.
Wow, I've never really heard anyone explain their method like that at all. That's really interesting. I'm excited to read more about it in your book. What was the most unexpected reaction you received from the equestrian community in regards to Taming Wild?
The most unexpected reaction was the deep interest that I got from so many people around the world. I feel like I spend my life telling people, you don't really want to do this. It takes too long. I mean, I love it. I don't want to do anything else, but you don't want to do this. Nobody has this kind of time. And yet people kept showing up to my clinics and going, well, I want to learn it anyway. And in the beginning, I was really afraid that if people didn't really have the time for it, it wouldn't be effective. But I got more and more reports back that people said, I just do this for 10 minutes before I put my halter on, and then my ride goes better. Or I just do it for 20 minutes after I'm done with my ride, and then my horse seems really more eager to see me the next day. So It's really been quite amazing to see that all the things I developed in sort of a pure experimental sense actually are applicable in little teeny ways to just about anybody's relationship with their horse.
So it sounds like you don't have to do the freedom-based training approach purely. Like you can use some of it with your own horse, even if they've been traditionally trained. What kind of advice would you have around blending a combination?
I actually think that honestly, a combination is probably the best thing for the horse. I still work on it in purity because I love it so much. And I joke that my horses would probably appreciate it if I put a whole halter on a little bit more often. I really think that horses get decision fatigue just like anybody else. And you know what it's like when somebody asks you for the 100th time, what do you want to have for dinner? And you go, oh, I don't know, do I have to decide again? And horses get that a little bit where they get tired of making decisions. And there is something wonderfully relieving about the halter going on and trusting that your human is going to make good decisions for you and is going to take care of you. My horses don't get that luxury. My horses have to spend a lot of time making their own decisions because I'm in love with this so much.
Yeah, and some people might argue that horses need leadership and clear guidance. I mean, we know the dominance theory has kind of been debunked now, but how do you balance providing direction? Because it sounds like you have a bit more of a pure approach, but I'm sure that your students perhaps ask for how can they provide more direction to their horses, especially when we have the practicalities of horse owning, like the vet, the trimmer, worming, etc.,
Yeah.
whilst still giving them freedom if that's possible.
So, what you do is you learn to read the health of their nervous system. So, how self-regulated are they? If they're really well self-regulated, then freedom is great. They make good decisions, they want to be in harmony, they work with you, all of that. As humans, we have a tendency to take them too far outside of their comfort zone. And when we take them too far outside of the comfort zone, what happens is you start to get a lot of fight and flight, a lot of push and pull. That's where good leadership or more dominance is probably going to keep everyone safer. And so I don't think dominance is a bad word at all. Dominance is really, really important when you want to stop your horse from running in front of a moving vehicle. Dominance is really, really important if they're sick and you need the vet to treat them so that they survive. There's a lot of situations where we maybe haven't strengthened their nervous system enough to walk into the situation we need them to walk into. And in that case, then some more pressure-based training, whether it's positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, either one, some more pressure-based training is going to get them through those situations more safely. What I choose to do is I choose to work more purely, but I have the advantage that I trim all of my horse's feet myself. So I can do that in little bits and pieces if and when and where they're ready. I have great veterinarians that have worked with me and have been willing to take things slow enough so they come at the right time of day and they work with me to make sure that the horse is in the right frame of mind. I realize not everybody has that luxury. And so that's when you're going to need a little bit more strength in your leadership to manage what your horse lacks in their nervous system strength.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say a well self-regulated horse looks like? Like, how can people identify that in their own horses?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. One is basically anytime your horse pushes in a way that makes you uncomfortable or pulls away from you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, they are dysregulated in that moment. So obviously we're not aiming for perfection here, but we're saying how quickly can they recover? So if they get a little dysregulated and there's a little push or pull, how quickly can they regulate again and come back into harmony with someone? As herd animals, I believe that their desire is to be in harmony with others, but only if they get their needs met. So they're all also individuals. And if their needs aren't met, they're going to start creating difficulties within the herd instead of seeking harmony. Once we have them seeking harmony, that tells you their nervous system is regulated. they get too tired, they get too hungry, they feel like they're being ignored, any number of things that can happen that raises their stress, they're going to dysregulate for a moment. You're going to see pushing, pulling, ignoring behavior, and then they're going to recover. Does it take them 5 seconds to recover? Does it take them an hour to recover? Does it take them 4 days to recover? That's how we measure a healthy nervous system.
I suppose it's like us too. Like when our basic needs are not being met, we're going to push and pull against life a whole lot more, like even if we've not had enough sleep or we've got a little sore back or something like that, we're going to have a harder time and be dysregulated.
Yep. So when you watch a herd together, I have a belief that most of the time when you see two horses having an argument with each other, it's because they're both tired and neither one wants to be on lookout while the other one sleeps. They both want to be the one sleeping, not the one on lookout. But neither one of them can sleep if neither one of them wants to be on lookout. And so they end up getting in this little argument, trying to wake the other one up so that they can take a rest and check out. It may not be lying down to sleep. It may just be eating without looking up for a while.
Yeah, wow. It sort of also reminds me of my daughter, who, funnily enough, is called Elsa. My grandma was called Elsa, so that's why we named her Elsa. But when she's tired, she is very clearly dysregulated. That's when the tantrums happen. That's when she wants to be a little bit closer to me all the time. So it's really interesting when those basic needs are not being met in either horse or human. That's when, I guess you could say, behavioral things pop up.
Yeah. Yeah. So, from being a mom, that's when you have to have a little bit of leadership and make good suggestions that might get you through that little bit of a rough period. When I talk about a horse with a really healthy nervous system, it's a horse that can think of that themselves. They don't necessarily need somebody to suggest, or they can take a very small suggestion. They don't need a heavy hand.
Yeah, yeah. And as the mum or the guider of the horse, the owner of the horse, I think it's hard in those moments to stay regulated yourself and calm and be in a place where you can guide the horse. Do you have any tips for those moments, perhaps not necessarily as a mum, but with the horses, how you can best be regulated yourself so then you can help your horse regulate?
So, there's lots of good suggestions, but you're going to laugh. My best suggestion is just survive to do better tomorrow.
Well, that makes sense from a parenting point of view too.
I think that far too many people really feel like they can fix the problem in the moment the problem is happening. And I really disagree. I think that there's a lot of things we can do to help it go more smoothly, but the biggest job we have is how do we strengthen the whole system so that these issues don't come up so often, so that these issues are easier next time they come up. And that's work that's done in the calm moments. It's not work that's done when everybody's tired.
Yes, and one thing I've noticed in terms of a pattern in my own horsemanship and in my own life is that there are just going to be days that are bad. Like there are going to be times where it's just not working out, and tomorrow is another day. And this is something I've noticed in sports as well, right? Like people can get so down when they lose in sports, but that there's going to be a win around the corner. Like it's just the ebb and flow of the nature of sport and life and parenting and horsemanship. There are so many connections there.
Yeah. So when we have those difficult moments, it's really important that we say, well, what do I learn from this? How would I do better in the future? And we think about it, but we don't try and fix it in the moment it's happening. Just try and survive it with the most grace we have.
I love that. If you could go back and redo the Mirror project with everything that you know now, would you do anything differently?
Yes. So there's a thing that I teach all the time, which is leave the horse wanting more. And I knew that in theory with Myrna, but I hadn't worked in freedom enough to realize how important it was. So we often say that horses go through 3 stages emotionally in training: a tolerance stage where they can do something but not for very long, an acceptance stage where they can do it for longer, but they don't have a lot of sensory involvement. They just seem a little bit flat line about it. And then enjoyment, where they can do it and they're using all of their senses better. And I really didn't look close enough under the microscope when I was first working with Myrna. So I would look at these in terms of like a whole day. Like today, when I worked with her, was she more in tolerance about the training we were doing, more in acceptance, or more in enjoyment? But I found that we really need to dial it down to the moments. So in the last 30 seconds, was the horse tolerating, where you can see the tension in their muscles and they're like, I'm going to push or pull soon if we don't end this soon? Were they in acceptance, where they were pretty relaxed and happy, but they weren't really using their senses? Or were they in enjoyment, where you can see their ears mobilize? You can see them breathing a little deeper to take in a smell. You can see them feel their face against the wind. You can see the senses working. What I found is that leaving horses wanting more is really about noticing those 30 seconds of enjoyment and walking away. And that's so hard to do because you get into that moment where you're in that place of enjoyment. You've just asked your horse to back up or turn or smell your hand or whatever it is you've asked them, and you see all of their senses light up. And as a human, we want more. And the moment we see it, we get greedy. And learning how to see it, walk away, take a break, and come back later, what that does is it leaves the horse wanting more of that experience. People say, but Elsa, I don't want to walk away when she's having fun. Well, your other choice is you walk away when they're not having fun. And that doesn't leave a good taste in their mouth.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense.
yeah. So this is one of the biggest things I teach in all of my clinics and all of my courses is how to leave at the right time. Now, you don't actually have to leave the horse, like as in leave the paddock and be gone for the day. You just have to change what you were doing. So if you were working on one thing, switch to something else. And if you could take everything you do and leave the horse wanting more of it, oh, the training gets so sweet. But we really have to work with the human greed there, because if it's good, the last thing we want to do is have that be the end of that piece of work.
Yeah. What is the most common misconception people have when they first start learning from you?
I would say the most common misconception is people think that I have miracle cures for disasters.
Mm.
And I do not have miracle cures. Actually, let me restate that. I was a dominant horse trainer in my previous life. I have a lot of miracle cures for disaster, but I don't choose to use them anymore. I don't choose to teach them anymore. What I tell people is survive that disaster as gracefully as you can, and then let's work really hard afterwards so that you don't get in that mess in the future. But a lot of people will say, so Elsa, when my horse is really, really upset, what do I do? And we can talk about it, but I'm not going to give you a miracle cure for that because I want you to figure out how to not end up in that situation.
Yeah. Did you go through when you were kind of transitioning from your more traditional horsemanship type methods of training to this freedom-based approach? Did you go through an identity crisis? Like, as in, especially since it sounds like it was your career beforehand and it's your career now, did you have doubts as to whether you were going to be able to do this professionally?
Oh, absolutely. So after the movie was finished, I was absolutely broke. I had no money at all. And I went back to work and I took every horse training job anybody would give me. And I used all the tricks in my bag. Everything that I knew how to do, I helped people with. And it was a very, very painful period of time for me because I just saw a lot of horses in situations that I didn't think they should be in. Situations that were outside, too far outside their comfort zone, that were too difficult for the strength of their nervous system. And I desperately wanted people to take the time so that training was more fun and more beautiful. But I didn't think anybody would take the time. And so I sort of had this despondent feeling about horse people for a while. And then little by little, people would ask me to teach what I'd done with Myrna. And I said, oh, it takes too long. It's too many hours. You're probably not interested. And they'd say, well, just show me anyway. And then I was really amazed at how many people were excited about it. It's not woo at all. It's not spiritual and mystical. It's beautiful, but it's actually just very, very logical.
Mm. Yeah, I feel though that a lot of people might think that it's woo woo and very spiritual. Like, have you gotten any backlash or criticism about your work?
Um, I really haven't, other than people say it takes too long, which I admit up front, it does take too long. So, if you watch the documentary with Myrna, that year that I spent with her, that represents 3 to 6 hours a day with one horse. So it's a profound time investment if you want to do freedom-based training as an entirety of your relationship. But if you are willing to intersperse it with other kinds of training, I find that it really helps every kind of training. And I'm not sure where I was going with that thought. I had another thought, but I got stuck with the fact that it's beautiful and I love it. Was
Yeah.
there a question there that I missed?
We're talking about have you received any criticism? You haven't
Ah,
really, because apart from it maybe taking a
right.
long time.
I
Um,
love that. I forgot the criticism question. Criticism? What's that? There's no criticism.
no,
No.
that's good. And then people thinking it is quite spiritual and woo
Yeah.
woo, but it is quite a logical system that you go through.
Yeah. So I definitely have had people drift away because they're more interested in telepathy or they're more interested in essential oils or they're more interested in something else. But I don't hold that against them. That's the beautiful thing. We have a huge world and we can tap into so many different options. And everybody gets to find their path in the way that makes horses feel good to them. I just particularly love this one, and it turns out there's quite a lot of people around the world that are interested in it also.
Yes, and obviously it's quite a unique approach to horses. And you mentioned that it was kind of difficult seeing horses in difficult situations when you were kind of transitioning. Do you still find it hard now to see horses, say, like in top level competition that are clearly stressed? And do you believe that the horse industry is moving towards a more ethical and choice-based approach?
That's a really interesting question. Yes, it is hard for me to watch. Um, I'm somewhat practical about it, and I do think that there's a lot of horses in the world that would like to be well cared for. And if they have to do a high stress job to be well cared for, they might actually choose that if they had the cognition to choose it. So I'm a bit logical about it. I do think that as long as money is involved, money and time go together. And so if people are working on the concept of we're going to train horses and have it be financially viable, I do think that we are likely to always have some pretty heavy-handed training that goes along with that. I
Mm.
think to the extent that people are willing to think of the horse more as a companion and less as a money maker machine, the training will get better and the sport world will get better. But there's always going to be a component of it that is spelled with money. And when it's spelled with money, people won't take the time.
Yeah, it is sad. But do you think it is possible to give the horse choice and incorporate some freedom-based techniques into your training and still do perhaps some low-level competition or yeah, where like as an amateur? What are your thoughts on that?
I actually think that it's extremely possible to go to the upper levels, interspersing some choice and some just really, really good horse handling that's maybe less choice. As I was saying earlier, horses actually seem to really appreciate it when there's less choice sometimes, as
Mm,
long as at the end of the day it goes well for them. So I think that when you have a horse that is healthy, that is really well bred for their job, that is mentally very sound, that has a very strong nervous system, they might well enjoy those top level of sports. The problem is when we try and put a lot of horses into that job that are maybe not as healthy as they should be, or they are not bred for the job They're not actually structurally sound. And there's always going to be a lot of those because everybody wants to do it. And is there enough horses that are actually fit for the job as there are people who want to do it? And then what do you do with all the other horses that are not fit for that job? We need to come up with other jobs for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Your
Yeah.
work has taken you around the world. Have you noticed cultural differences in how people perceive and interact with horses?
The biggest difference I see is actually more driven by heat versus cold.
Ah,
So, what I find is that in very hot climates, you have horses that are more likely to go to freeze than they are to go to fight or flight. And
wow.
so you have very different training issues in hot weather places than you do in cold weather places. In cold weather places where the horses they need to build up body heat, they tend to practice a lot when they get a little dysregulated, being very dramatic with fight or flight. And so that leads you to a whole different training issues.
Is really interesting. And where my mind goes is, are those horses in colder climates kept in smaller areas or perhaps even stables because of the climate, which perhaps would also feed into that need to express that flight response, or it's easier to express that flight response because they're so keen to move anyway, or is it just
So
temperature? Like, it's an
you
interesting
would
observation.
Yeah, you'd think so. But the time that I spent in Costa Rica, where it was quite hot, I saw a lot of horses kept in very small boxes with
Mm,
no room to move. And
okay.
when they were let out, they still had no desire to go anywhere very fast.
Wow. It also makes me think, you know how some people run hot? I'm sure that there are horses that
Yeah.
just run a little hotter as well in
Yeah,
terms of temperature. You know, some horses just sweat more easily. I wonder if those horses are more likely to show a freeze response than a flight response or fight response. Have you
probably.
noticed? Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I've studied that enough, but it would be an interesting thing to start looking at.
Hmm.
I love looking at patterns and trying to figure things out. But I do think that's a thing we don't think about very often. And I see it particularly when people buy horses from a hot climate and ship them to a cold climate.
Mm.
And then there's all of a sudden talk of he must have been drugged when I tried him out. No, he wasn't drugged. He was just really hot.
Yeah. Yeah, and we know that the weather can have such an influence on how our horses feel. Like, even
Yeah.
when I let my horses up to the area that I train and play with them, I observe the way they come up. I don't lead them up, I just open the gate. You know,
Mhm.
Sundays, it might be a little warmer and it's a mild day. And they'll just kind of slowly walk up, like very calmly. And then other days, it's a little chilly, it's a little windy, and they are bucking and cantering up to where we play. And it's like, oh, okay. It's
Yeah,
it's interesting.
it is. It is. So, what dysregulation looks like in different climates is different. And you sort of have to learn to adjust for that. So that's the biggest difference I see. And then also just people who really have spent a lot of time with horses in warm climates, uh, they can get really disconcerted if all of a sudden the horses are a lot more energetic than they usually are. And vice versa, people who live in a cold climate, they can feel like there's something wrong. Is this horse ill? If it gets really hot, like all of a sudden they get a little panicky because they're not used to seeing that different way of relating to the world.
That's so interesting. You've created documentaries, a book, an online course, and clinics worldwide. What is next for you and freedom-based training?
So I do have an app that's coming out for people's phones.
Cool.
It's still in the working process. One of the things that sort of has come up in all of this is the idea that how do you measure something like freedom-based training? And how do you make progress if you can't measure something? And so it's really been an interesting problem to sort of help my students measure their progress in something that's more about feeling than it is about doing. And so I have an app for the phone that's coming out so that people can take notes better on their training progress, which is kind of fun. It's been really fun to develop that.
Yeah, cool. And
And then
Sorry, I was going to say, is there a way have you created a way for them to measure their progress within that app?
Yeah. So, what I do is I take everybody through 5 levels of training. And you'll do all 5 levels in one day. Or if you're having a bad day, you might just do the first level or the first 2 levels. You do what your horse is ready for, um, what they are keen on. And we build that desire in the horse so that they want more of this training instead of wanting less. And so what I do is I walk my students through a process where you just pick 1 or 2 words for each level of training on that day. And what this does is it creates a sense memory in your head of sort of what it was that was really important to you and your horse on that day. And this is something that I've been doing for the last year or so with my herd. And a bunch of my students have been doing it as well. It's a little bit akin to a gratitude journal, but really brief, really, really brief. So, the first thing we do is we watch the horse. Who are they today? When I watch them, before I interact with them, could I pick 1 or 2 words that seems to describe my horse? And the funny thing about this is it often says more about me than it does about the horse.
Mm.
And if I look at 30 days of training and I look at my 1 or 2 words over 30 days, I get a really clear idea of what that relationship's like. And it's really a really interesting practice to see this over the scope of 30 days. What is it that's important to you guys every day? What is it that drives your relationship, that motivates you guys, that makes you want to see each other? And so the first thing is we watch the horse. The second thing is we mark behaviors that are good that we didn't create. So things the horse does naturally, things the horse chooses to do without any support from anyone else. We mark those behaviors with passivity. So the horse starts going, oh, I should do more of that. It got attention from someone. And then, at the end of the session, we write down what's the favorite thing that you affirmed? What behavior did your horse offer that nobody made them do, that you marked as a good behavior for them, that might help them repeat it in the future? You get 30 days of that, you get a pretty clear idea of who your horse is and what's important to the two of you. And then the next step is supporting. So when you are with your horse, could you help them feel better? Is there any action you could take that actually supports them to use their nervous system better, that actually supports them to be more functional? We're not talking about actions here like making them trot or canter, but we're talking about just little things. Like, for instance, if you scratch their neck, did it help them feel better? Well, that's great. But if it's the only thing you have and you wrote down scratch their neck 30 days in a row, we might need to build a little diversity into that support program.
That sounds really interesting. And I like how it's brief because it's achievable and you're more likely to do it and then see those patterns. So I'm curious to check that out as well.
Yeah.
Did you say there was something else on the horizon for freedom-based training too?
So, my big goal, I have a big goal, and that is that I teach a bunch of things that feel very logical to me. And when I teach them, people say, of course, that seems so logical to me also, but they're not commonplace. And so my goal in the world is that I can do enough teaching and enough sharing of this that people know how to notice the emotional cycles of a horse. People know how to see a dysregulated nervous system. People say, of course, I'm going to stop and rest there, because why wouldn't you stop and rest there? Doesn't everybody know that? I want this stuff to become so normal that nobody knows it came from me. It just is the way you treat a horse.
Yes, that would be amazing. Yes. And I guess answers the next question, which is if there's one key lesson you hope people take away from your work, what would it be? Is it that?
Well, it is that, but I boiled it down a little bit farther. And that is that we talk about feel and timing. Feel is knowing what to do. Timing is knowing when to do it. If you can get your horse, if you know your horse well enough that you know their timing, it turns out feel is not that important. You can try a million different actions and a million different types of passivity, and it doesn't matter that much as long as you know when to do it. So knowing when to do something is a million times more important than exactly what you do. And I think that's a thing that I wish I could give the whole world, that you have a huge amount of latitude to try things and experiment and just see what happens if you learn to read your horse first and know when is a good time to try things. You don't need to know exactly what to do, but you do need to know when to do it.
I absolutely love that. And I'm so excited to read your book after this chat today. Please tell us more about when it will be available and how people can find out more about you, your clinics and your online courses, the app, etc.
So tamingwild.com is my website, and that's probably the best place to go. That'll link you to all the various different things. The book will be out in the first week of June. I'm very, very excited to share this with the world. It's been a journey to get to the place where I could share this, and I'm really, really pleased with how it came out. The movies are available via Vimeo, and you can find the links to them on my website. My clinic list is on my website. I also have a Patreon group, so people who want a little bit more, I post in my Patreon group a video every couple of weeks of what I'm working on. So just me with my horses practicing what I preach. And in that Patreon group, we also have salons where we meet and we talk. Every couple of months, we'll have a meeting where people can bring questions and we just have a little bit of a chat about all of these things within the context of freedom and strengthening the horse's nervous system and developing really fit and healthy horses in terms of their emotional states.
So good. And you also have your Tea Time podcast, and I'll pop all the links to, which I love listening to, by the way. I'll pop all the links to everything you've mentioned in the show notes too, so people can check them out. Elsa, thank you so much for coming onto the show today and sharing your deeply thoughtful approach to horses. I know our listeners will be feeling inspired to connect more deeply and consciously with their horses. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful chatting, and I look forward to whatever it is that we all stumble into next. I'm sure it'll be beautiful.
Thanks for tuning in to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the show so you never miss an update. I'd truly appreciate if you could leave a rating and review or share this episode on social media. It helps more listeners discover the podcast and hopefully has a positive impact on the horse world. For more resources on horsemanship and rider exercise, visit amaliadempsey.com. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.